In the first part of this video, I decided to do a countdown of my top 10 most wanted Marvel Legends heroes. These are characters who have not been produced in the Marvel Legends line before, or at the very least were significant variants, characters in an outfit or costume that we'd not seen previously in figure form. As I remarked in that last video, I found it really difficult to narrow it down to just 10, because despite producing so many toys over the last 20 years, and giving us such a broad range of characters to explore, there's still an awful lot out there that I've never seen life in plastic. In today's video, I'm going to be applying the same logic, this time to the villains, and if anything, this is much harder to narrow down to just 10, but I'm going to have a go. Okay, so at number 10 I have Nightmare. Nightmare is a slightly obscure character for the Marvel Universe, but he's been around from the very early days. In fact, he was jointly created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko for Strange Tales. And since then he's hung around the Marvel Universe on the periphery in that dreamscape or nightmare realm, where he will often encounter many of Marvel's top tier superheroes and ruin a good night's sleep. But chiefly, he makes most of his appearances in some of the more supernatural titles like Doctor Strange or Ghost Rider. And he's quite an interesting character. Of course, there's a lot of surreal imagery around him, so there's a lot of scope for artistic license when it comes to creating a figure of him. He's pretty much had the one look across the years, which is the green outfit with the curved shoulder pads or collar, and that menacing, pale, corpse-like face. And I could easily see him being a standalone special release, maybe even an exclusive, although that wouldn't be my preference because I don't like exclusives because they're really hard to get hold of. But I do think he'd be a really cool addition to the line and a significantly different kind of character to introduce to the collection. At number 9 I have the Executioner. I'm surprised we haven't had a version of this figure already, since obviously he's had a big screen appearance, and he seems perfect to reutilise one of the Wrecking Crew bodies for this. At a push, I even think he could be a deluxe figure or a builder figure. And I think it'd be nice to actually round out some of the Thor characters, because we have surprisingly very little for this very popular character. So far all we really have is a number of variants of Thor, the Enchantress, Malekith, and Beta Ray Bill, and there was a version of Hela out there, but this was an exclusive and was very tricky to get hold of. So it would be nice to round out some of the God of Thunder's rogues gallery, and the Executioner is a prime candidate for that. He's a big, brash, larger than life character, and he'd be ideal to put on display against Thor. And once again, he's been around a very long time. This is a character that has survived decades and reappeared multiple times, so I think there'd be a lot of appeal for collectors to get hold of this character. Number 8 might be a controversial choice, but I've got Doom 2099. Now I did say I didn't want to just litter this with variants. We've had a lot of different Doctor Doom figures over the years. However, I think this is an obvious one that we're kind of missing. And in this title, he's not so much the villain as an anti-hero. But I do think that this look is really cool, and I think it'll be a fairly easy one for Hasbro to put out. I've always really liked this look with the blue cloak and the red eyes. And whilst I know that 2099 wasn't a particularly well received, or to be fair, well executed line of comics, I do feel like it's due a retrospective treatment, because the whole line is often dismissed, but there actually were a few gems in there, and I think Doom 2099 is one of those exceptions. And it would be cool to have a line dedicated to the 2099 range and just pick the best characters from those comics. Plus, I think he'd make a really cool toy. At the end of the day, Doctor Doom never really grows old. He's always got a fantastic design, no matter what variant you give him, so I think this would be well received. At number 7 I have Lilith. Now this might be a slightly obscure character for a lot of viewers, as she seems to have been largely neglected and forgotten about in the Marvel Universe in recent years. But I have very strong memories of this character sort of being around in the very early 90s. In fact, she was a reoccurring villain for Ghost Rider and was the catalyst for the formation of the Midnight Suns. So this was a range of comics that all loosely tied together to fight the big bad, and that was Lilith. I've always thought the design of this character is really cool and interesting, very gothic, very creepy, and her role as the mother of all demons makes her a pretty interesting and important character. And as such, I've always had a long-standing interest in this character and always kind of hoped that they would make a figure of her. We've had a couple from the Ghost Rider comics. We did get Blackheart and Vengeance back in the Toy Biz days, but we haven't really had much Ghost Rider representation since Hasbro have taken over. So given that Hasbro seems to be targeting the 90s more in the last couple of years, Lilith would be a real contender for me on one of my top choices. At number 6, I've got the Crimson Dynamo. It's really surprising when you think how many Iron Man villains we have yet to see in figure form. I could do an entire top 10 list of just Iron Man characters, and that's really sad because these are really fun, interesting characters and they have great designs, and Crimson Dynamo is a perfect example of this. He's had a few different looks across the years, but this is the one that I particularly would like to see. And frustratingly, they have made this figure in the Marvel Universe scale, so that was the 3 3/4 inch scale. So the mould is out there, I just wish they'd scale it up and release it in the main Marvel Legends line. It'd be absolutely fantastic. Hasbro did release a Crimson Dynamo figure, but it was a much more modern look. And they also released a Build-A-Figure version. Again, this is an entirely different kind of look, and it's not what I think of when I think of Crimson Dynamo. It's all entirely subjective, of course, and a lot of it depends on when you grew up reading comics, but for me, this is what I think of when I think of Crimson Dynamo, and I just love this outfit. I think it's really cool and chunky and militaristic, and it just looks great. At number 5, I have Deathbird. This is another one I'm really surprised we haven't had already. Together with Lilandra, you'd imagine these figures would sell really well because there's such a long history of these characters and they're well loved across multiple generations. And given that we've had a fair amount of cosmic characters in recent years, from Guardians of the Galaxy, Silver Surfers, etc., and the fact that we've had a Gladiator, I think we need the rest of the Royal Imperial Court, don't you? And Deathbird is such a perfect foil for Lilandra. They've got the same sort of basic look, but obviously she's much more fierce looking, she's much more of a warrior. I particularly like the Jim Lee representation, and she's such a colourful character as well, and I think the design of the costume is really interesting and could work really well in action figure form. I think it'd look fantastic with those wings, and if she had a couple of guns, I think it'd be really visually pleasing figure to have on the shelf. Number 4 will probably surprise people again, but I have Kane. I fully appreciate that a lot of people have a lot of distaste and bad memories of the Clone Saga that ran in the 90s. However, I was reading comics at this time and I thought the first half of it was really engaging and interesting. Admittedly, I think it went on too long and there was a few missteps along the way, but I do still vividly remember it being very engaged with it and thinking it was really interesting and scary in places. And Kane was a huge part of that. There's a lot of mystery around his character initially, and he was very threatening. He was a monstrous character that was constantly trying to kill the Scarlet Spider. And to this day, I think the design of the character is still aesthetically really appealing. I think having the various scarred, webbed effect across his body is really cool. I love the contrast of colours between that sort of deep blue and the bright sort of magenta purple cape is really cool. And the long flowing hair feels very different to anything we see these days. Plus, given the fact that we've been given a Scarlet Spider and the sort of sensational Ben Reilly Spider-Man, I think it'd be really cool to round out this collection and actually throw Kane in there. And if Hasbro wants to go one better, they could throw in a trench-coated Jackal and maybe Spider-Side. At number 3, I have the Controller. Again, the Controller is certainly a character who sits on the fringes of the Marvel Universe, but his origins date back all the way to 1969 where he first made his appearance in Iron Man. And since this time, he's been a reoccurring villain across the years, mostly locking horns with Iron Man or Captain Marvel. And I've always thought there's something really interesting about his design, and I'm surprised he's not used more often in the Marvel Universe, as his size and look reminds me a lot of Thanos actually in a lot of ways. He's a much larger than life character, he's quite a big villain, he's got a big stature, and he has this really hideously disfigured kind of face as well. He uses these control discs that he puts on people's heads to control their minds, and he's quite a creepy, disturbing kind of villain. And I like that his costume is relatively straightforward and just has those 2 tones of blue in there. That makes him really visually appealing, and I think he would be an oversized figure. So again, he might be a deluxe or he might be a Build-A-Figure, and I think they could pretty much reuse the classic Thanos figure from the Infinity Gauntlet that was released last year. and just repaint it and give him a brand new head sculpt. And I think you'd pretty much be there really, because the scale will be more or less the same. He should be larger than life, he should be bigger than the standard 6 inches, and be a bit more overbearing. So I think this would be a really, really cool addition to add to the lineup. And I think it'd be something of a first, because I don't think the controller's ever had a figure in a Marvel toy line, certainly not at a 6-inch scale, and I don't think he had one in the old Toy Biz 5-inch scale either. Okay, number 2, I have Mephisto. I am really shocked that we haven't had this figure already, because surely it's a no-brainer. Mephisto is the ultimate big bad of the Marvel Universe, since he pretty much is the devil. And his look changes from period to period and depending on the comic that he's in, but this is pretty much his standard look really, with the demonic face, the all in red, 2 tones of red there, and the big red cloak. Pretty creepy looking, very demonic looking, and a fantastic design. Once again, he's a character who's been in the Marvel Universe for a very, very long time, and has been fairly consistent in his appearances across the years. He's not really an obscure character, because he does show up an awful lot. Now, interestingly, Marvel Select released a 7-inch scale version of this figure, which is absolutely fantastic, and it has sort of set the bar really for this character. Even better, he came with that disturbing throne as well, made of skulls, which is really cool. But yeah, it's a fantastic figure, and I think the scale works absolutely fine with our Marvel Legends. Mephisto can vary his size, so it's okay that he's slightly larger, but it would be nice to have one at the 6-inch scale, since really when we do see him, he's usually the same sort of size as the other characters. He's not generally much taller. And it would of course be the first time he's appeared in this line at all since its very inception, all the way back there to 2002. So I think we're long overdue a Mephisto figure in the Marvel Legends line. And he would be very welcome, and he would be embraced by fans who I'm sure he'd fly off the shelf. Okay, and at the very top of my list I have the Mandarin. This probably isn't taking anyone by surprise, as this is a figure that fans have been clamouring for a very long time, and there seems to be real reluctance on the part of Hasbro to bring him to us. It doesn't really make sense, since this is a really important villain. He's Iron Man's arch nemesis. He's about to make his big screen appearance in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. He's a classic character because he's been around since the very early days of the Marvel Universe, and he's always been around. He's never really gone away. He pretty much turns up in every creator's run that they have on Iron Man. And we are long overdue a proper Mandarin figure. Toy Biz did manage to give us one look for their special Face-Off series. They had this version with the helmet on and the green attire, and then they had the red version with the unmasked head. In truth, this figure isn't the greatest because they opted to give him this rubber robes, so he's very restricted in his movements, and overall it's not a fantastic look because his arms are constantly outstretched. Plus, this was released a long time ago now, and we're certainly due an update. And there's no shortage of different variants and outfits that we should have for the Mandarin. And that's maybe where things start to get a little tricky. Which look are we going to use? Because I don't think there's a definitive overall look that we would say is distinctively the Mandarin. He's had so many varying looks across the years, it can be tricky to kind of choose which one's going to be the one you're going to use for your figure to please the most people. His classic 60s look, for example, isn't one that I particularly like, nor am I really keen on the later 80s one, which is much more samurai influenced and is more of a armour kind of look. Personally, given my own personal bias, I like the sort of 90s look. I do like the long robes with the green and the yellow. But in all truth, if I was going to pick one, for me, I would actually go for the animated series Mandarin, which has fully green skin and a very different look to anything we see in the comics. Now, I fully appreciate there's probably a lot of fans out there shouting at the screen right now, why would I choose that one? It's purely personal choice. This is where I was introduced to Iron Man in the first place through this cartoon. This is the first time I saw the Mandarin, and this is the impression it made on me as a child. So therefore, this is again how I tend to think of the Mandarin. Even though I appreciate it's probably not the best representation of the character, I would love to have this as a toy. Really, really would. And given that we've had some of that retro packaging design from the 90s figures recently, with the animated series of Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, I'd be really keen to get hold of an Iron Man package as well and have this Mandarin in it. But to be honest, at this point, I would settle for pretty much any version of the Mandarin because Iron Man's pretty lonely on my shelf at the moment. He doesn't have a lot of his rogues gallery around him, and I think we do need to address this. So there you go, there's my top 10 wish list for the villains I wish that Hasbro will produce in the next few years. I do think it's inevitable we'll get some of these at least, but as I said at the top of the video, this was a really difficult list to narrow down to just 10. I have another, well, at least another 10 that I was arguing myself to place on this list, so I think as time goes on we'll be able to update this video from time to time and see what has been released and what else can make it onto this list. I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as I'll be posting more videos soon.